The variety of expressions within the Second Temple period is quite evident and led Rabbi Jacob Nusser to argue that one must speak of Judaisms when referring to the post-exilic period of Jewish faith through the destruction of the Second Temple. At the same time, it can be argued that although the greater Jewish world was unquestionably diverse, as testified to by the number of sects in the later period, there remained several essential elements that seem to have been common to most parties. These factors framed how Jews perceived themselves. They also influenced the approaches or philosophy they adopted in dealing with non-Jews. These common elements were centered on the temple cult, the Torah and its observance, and a sense of connection with the land of Israel. Non-Jewish authors supply extensive evidence of critical elements further defining Jewish identity, and that consequently serve to distinguish between Jews and outsiders. The 3 points previously mentioned may be expanded more broadly. The first, and perhaps most obvious, is the monotheistic character of Jewish worship. Monotheism in and of itself was a critical distinction in a larger society that was characterized by polytheism. The second is the circumcision of Jewish males. Strabo opines that after Moses, from superstition arose circumcisions and excisions and other observances of the kind. Tacitus records, they, that is the Jews, adopted circumcision to distinguish themselves from other people by this difference. The third observance that was distinctive was the observance of the Sabbath, or Shabbat. The idea of a seventh day on which work was prohibited seems to have been restricted to Jews. Meleager of Gadara, a town just east of the Jordan, ridiculed the Jewish prohibition of lighting fires on the Sabbath. The poet Rutilius Namatanius also echoed this criticism. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher, held laziness as the reason behind Jewish abstentions from work. The historian Tacitus speculated that the origin of the Sabbath stemmed from the Israelite departure from Egypt, or that it was created to honor Saturn. Romans such as Ovid, Seneca, and Tacitus provide evidence of Jewish observance of the Sabbath and paint a picture that portrayed Jews as universally observing the laws of the Sabbath by abstaining from work, lighting lamps, and drinking wine. Another distinctive element was the observance of dietary laws. The historian Strabo believed that the dietary laws were not from Moses, but were derived from a later period. After Moses, superstitious men were appointed to the priesthood and then tyrannical people, and from superstition arose abstinence from flesh, from which it is their custom to abstain even today. The Latin author Petronius recognized the abstention from pork as a key tenet of Jewish life. Even if a Jew should worship the divinity of pork and invoke the ears of the sky above, if, however, he did not submit to circumcision and removal of the foreskin skillfully, driven out by his people, he will emigrate from a Greek city and not be able to observe the law of fasting on the Sabbath. Epictetus records the differences between Jews and non-Jews regarding swine. This is the conflict between Jews and Syrians and Egyptians and Romans, not over the question whether holiness should be put before everything else and should be pursued in all circumstances, but whether the particular act of eating swine's flesh is holy or unholy. Another element that may be recognized is the pattern of assembly reflected in synagogue worship. The last element is the dedicated study of the Torah, or the Mosaic Law. Diaspora Judaism, in its various forms, shared these central ideas to a large extent. However, unlike their Palestinian counterparts of the Jews who lived in the land of Israel, they could not focus the same degree of attention to the temple cult because of their distance. Furthermore, their more intimate contact with Hellenistic culture brought some to modify their observance of the Torah. This cannot be equated to an attitude of infidelity concerning Jewish observance, however. In some sense, the variability of Jewish identity during this period appears to have rivaled that of modern society. According to the scholar E.P. Sanders, the overall distinctive perspective of all Second Temple Judaisms was centered on the concept of covenantal nomism. That is, the idea that God has established a relationship with the people of Israel, and that this relationship was embodied through the covenant of Torah. Briefly put, covenantal nomism is the view that one's place in God's plan is established on the basis of the covenant, and that the covenant requires as the proper response of man his obedience to its commandments.